In today's video, I'm going to be creating a tier list with all 136 FBS teams for the 2025 college football season. And usually I split it up between the power conferences and the group of 5, but I thought it might be fun to just do them all at once one last time before the season gets here because tier lists are fun. So we've got a familiar looking list here. We've got our tiers. I went ahead and decided to go with 6 tiers for this one because we have so many teams from different levels in this one. So we've got Natty contention. Those are going to be our national title contenders, teams that I think have a legit shot of winning a national title this year. College football playoff contenders, conference contenders, bowl teams, below mid, and bad teams. So pretty self-explanatory tiers, and we've got all 136 of our logos here. Shout out to whoever made this and put all these logos in here. That's super clutch. So let's just get into it and start doing it, and maybe we'll just go in alphabetical order. I think we could just start from the top here. I don't think it's completely. In fact, it looks like it's the SEC first and the ACC. So I guess we'll just start with the SEC here. We've got Alabama as the first team here. They are a national title contender this season. I have absolutely no doubt that they will be in a position to win a national title or at least compete for one this season. If you look at their talent roster, it's elite. If you have any doubts, maybe it's about the coaching. They had a rough year one under Kalen DeBoer, but I don't really have concerns there because I know the depth of this staff and I know the circumstances they had to deal with last year. That leaves us with a pretty interesting team, Auburn. I do think Auburn's going to get to a bowl game this year. They had a lot that went wrong for them last season. The turnover bug, the injury bug, I should say, the turnover problem, although you could call it a bug. But I think Hugh Freeze's squad will at least get to a bowl game. There's definitely some disaster potential. I'm not super high on Jackson Arnold, but I think they could make a bowl game. Now, Arkansas is a team that I did say was going to miss a bowl game in a video when push comes to shove and the records come. But because we're also including group of 5 teams, everything's not going to fit super neatly. And I think it'd be pretty disrespectful to have Arkansas in the below mid tier because that's not what I would describe them as. Taylon Green is an excellent passer. He definitely gives the offense upside. Bobby Petrino's done a great job. Defensively, there are a lot of questions. But I think Arkansas, a bowl team this year, or at least in that category is where I'd put them. There's a scenario where they make a bowl game. It's not like black and white, like I think they're not a bowl team and they have to be. It's just when I'm honest with myself and I have to pick all the records, Arkansas's record comes out to 5-7 most of the time, but it could go 7-5 this year. They could have a pleasantly surprising year. We'll see with Arkansas. Texas A&M, I am a little bit conflicted on. I am going to, because I have battered Aggie syndrome, and I'm not a Texas A&M fan. I just have been high on Texas A&M and burned by them more times than not. So I'll put them in CFP contention. They're going to be in that conversation. They're a team that can make the CFP this year based on their talent roster. This is not a Jimbo Fisher coach team. This is a Mike Elko coach team. We'll put them in that category. We've got LSU in here as well. I have a ton of confidence in LSU this year. I'm really trusting the defensive rebuild, so why not? We're putting them in national title contention tier here. Oklahoma, another one that is really interesting. I don't know if they have the upside to win a national title this year with how much new there is, but they definitely have the upside to contend for the CFP, and I have them in my CFP, so it'd be hypocritical of me to put them anywhere lower than CFP contention because I think they're a team that's that good and is capable of that. We've got the Texas Longhorns in here very easily in the top tier. They do have some question marks, but it's all relatively speaking. I don't think if you're a sane person, you can say Texas's floor falls any lower than like 9-3. The Longhorns are going to be an excellent team this year, and Sarkisian has shown the ability to reload the team year after year. Ole Miss is an interesting case study this year under Lane Kiffin. Definitely got some concerns about how that defensive front is looking. Will it be quite as effective as last year? I think not. I wouldn't put them as low as bowl teams. I'd put them in the conference contention tier, knowing that they're not probably contending for a conference title in the SEC, but they'll be competitive in conference play. So maybe that's on me for making the tier names a little flawed here. Mississippi State is a team that I would almost want to put in the bowl teams tier, but I really don't see the scenario where that happens. So we're actually going to put them in the below mid tier. We did watch this team lose at home to Toledo last season. There was a lot that went pretty horribly wrong. And they didn't exactly have a great offseason. They do have some nice pieces. They did bring in Fluff Bothwell. They do have returning contributors on both sides of the football. But I just feel like on paper they might look good, but they were pretty bad last season. So, and I say good, relatively speaking. Obviously, they're not looking like a good SEC team this year. So I'm actually comfortable putting them below mid. But that's going to be the only SEC team that ends up in that tier. We've got Georgia, obviously a natty contender. I don't think there's any pushback there. I have questions about what their offensive ceiling can be with Gunnar Stockton at the helm, but I still think they'll contend for a national title. Florida is another one that's interesting here. I've got some concerns about the injury stuff. I was spreading fake news earlier this week saying Dallas Wilson was out for the season. I apologize for that. If anyone saw that and was like, what on earth is this guy talking about? He's only out for like a couple of weeks, but it's the nagging injuries to like Lagway and some of his receivers and along the trenches. And that is just concerning to me, especially when Florida's defense didn't show us a large sample size of playing at a super high level last year. And then also their offense had inconsistency, and I'm a little worried about them at the start of the season. Kentucky's another team to talk about here. I will show them just a little bit more respect because Mark Stoops typically does have a better year when nobody really believes in him or his team. Zach Calzada had a really great year last season. I believe at Incarnate Word. That might be wrong. Hopefully it's not. At the FCS level, I think he could be a solid, maybe average quarterback in the SEC. And they rebuilt their backfield. Maybe they can get back to having some of those great characteristics that Stoops teams have typically had. The jury is still kind of out, though. I don't have them necessarily making a bowl game the majority of the time. That upside does exist. And again, we're including the group of 5 as well. So we got to keep that in mind here when we're making these placements. Tennessee, I'm actually going to put in the bowl teams tab. Might seem a little bit disrespectful to a team that just made the CFP last year. A lot of drama in the offseason. The quarterback change, sudden change of quarterback, I don't love. They're about to name Aguilar the starter, but I think they're going to have some offensive issues again that plague them and some inconsistency. And the defense was really, really good last year. Are they going to be able to maintain that with some of the pieces they lost to the draft? And Jermond McCoy nursing that injury is probably going to be out for most of the year. So not super, super optimistic on Tennessee. I think they're going to be one of those teams that is just a casualty to the grueling schedule. They might fall through the cracks. We're also going to put Vandy in this tier. I'm kind of putting the tiers in order of like how I feel on the teams, but I'm definitely not going to be able to maintain that throughout the list, especially as the tiers get really crowded. But Vanderbilt is a team that we know what they are. With Diego Pavia at the helm, it feels like they could upset anyone, but they also could lose to anybody, and anything's going to be possible for them this year, except for not anywhere like above like an 8-4 season, right? Vanderbilt football has some limitations because their overall talent level isn't super high. Even though they play really gritty and they play with a chip on their shoulder and all this stuff, and Pavia is a great leader, there is a ceiling on their season. But still, I think it's respectful to have them in that tier, the bowl teams tier. South Carolina is the next team to talk about here. The Gamecocks are a team that has a lot of upside. I'm thinking about CFP contention, and I think that's where I will put them. It feels kind of silly to have Ole Miss there, but we'll go ahead and actually put Missouri in there. With Sellers at the helm at South Carolina, I really trust their ability to be able to swing and upset again. I think they can make the college football playoff. Missouri is a team that also maybe technically could. They've got a pretty navigatable schedule, but there's also a lot of new. Bo Pribula, Ahmad Hardy had only 1 year under his belt. It was a great year, but it was in the Sun Belt, so now we'll see how he can produce in the SEC. They had a guy like... Man, I was just about to forget their wide receiver's name. They just snagged from Mississippi State. Kevin Coleman Jr., there he is, who they think could be the next Luther Burden, but we'll have to see if he can produce in a functional offense with a team that's, actually winning games versus, a dysfunctional situation that he was at in Mississippi State. So a few things where the jury's still out for Missouri, but they'll still be a solid team. Again, conference contender tier. In fact, maybe I should just change the tier names. Is that allowed to change them on the fly? Natty contention, CFP contention, and then instead of conference contention, I'm just going to say great, because whatever, these teams are great. And then instead of bowl teams, good. And then instead of below mid. And then so let's just move Kentucky here, and we'll leave that as it is. Everybody okay with that? All right, cool. Let's move on. These just make a little bit more sense in my brain for some reason. We'll go next to Clemson, national title contender. I think they've got the roster. They look like a vintage Clemson team. They've got the returning guys. That's not really a hot take. Georgia Tech, CFP contention. That is a hot take. They are in my ACC title game this year and also in my playoff. I love their returning production. I think they've got just killers all over the field on this team this year. And I just like a lot of the little tweaks they made this offseason. And they've already shown they can beat good teams. They beat Miami last year. They nearly took out Georgia. Historically, under Brent Key, they have beaten really good teams. They just need to get more consistent versus the inferior opponents, which is an easier step to make than beating the good opponents or the great opponents, or in some cases the elite opponents. And so I just think they can make a magical run this year. So while they might not be as talented or maybe don't have as great of odds at CFP contention, I'm going to put them in that tier because I think they've got what it takes to get there this year. Florida State's going to be a polarizing team. I think they'll be good this year. And again, I'm not really worried about the order in the tier. As far as I'm concerned, they're just all in the same tier. I'll indicate if they're maybe lower or higher within the tier just by saying it. But Florida State, at the very least, is going to be coached a little bit better with two good coordinators in Gus Malzahn and Tony White this year. They're a little bit better looking on paper. Well, it's not actually true. They looked pretty great on paper last offseason, but it feels like they learned from some mistakes from last year. So we'll see if they actually do. Florida State fans, for their mental health, better pray that they did learn a thing or two from last season's disastrous 2-10. Miami's the next team on here. I think it would be kind of silly to say Miami's not in college football playoff contention. I think they will be this season. Corey Heatherman's the new defensive coordinator. The offense, I think, will be fine. Regardless of what you think of Beck, it will be fine. At the very least, good. Finds a little bit disrespectful of a word and has great upside. It's the defense where, let's see if there's some growing pains under Corey Heatherman. I happen to think there will be some growing pains this year. Usually when we see a team that's in a situation very similar to this, it's not just like year one, you bring in a new DC and things just click and it's amazing. It's going to take a little bit. So I like the coordinator hire. I think it's going to take a little bit. We got Syracuse in here. I'm going to put Syracuse in the good tier just because of Fran Brown as a head coach, and I'm trying not to let Syracuse's really difficult schedule affect my opinion of them in a list like this because they do have a tough schedule. It's going to be hard for them to make a bowl game, but I still think they'll be a good team, and I trust this staff based on what they've done so far and what they've gotten out of their teams to do something. And I do think it says a lot that they went and landed Steve Angeli to add some juice to this quarterback room, just in the fact that they're still, trying to field a good team this year and have a good year. So that's good stuff to see. Boston College is going to be the next team in here, and Boston College pretty much eternally belongs in the mid-tier. They also have a pretty difficult schedule this year that could see them missing a bowl game, even though they usually go like 6-6. There's just not a ton of things that stand out for this team. Last year, the defense was spotty to mediocre at best, and that was with multiple NFL guys on the defense. They're not going to have those guys this year. And I don't know. I just feel like the Boston College hype that existed very briefly last season kind of quickly fizzled out after they had a rough finish to the season. And now it feels like it's mostly gone away. And it was just kind of like, oh, they kind of had an easier schedule last year. That's how they started so well. And, oh, the Florida State top 10 win wasn't a real top 10 win. And, oh, Missouri was actually kind of mediocre. So things have quickly fallen apart there in terms of the narrative of them like rising as a program, at least in my opinion. Next up, we've got North Carolina, the Tar Heels, Bill Belichick, year one. I think they'll be genuinely great this year. I really think that defense is going to come along in year one. And I've talked about how I really like that Freddie Kitchens stays in-house and stays as the OC. And I think they've got a high ceiling there with Gio Lopez at quarterback, who showed great stuff at South Alabama. Duke, I think, is getting a little bit disrespected in the offseason. I think they'll be great this year as well. Kind of in that same tier and category as North Carolina. I think Duke's defense is actually a little bit underrated. Shout out Chandler Rivers, one of the best DBs in college football this year that very few people are talking about and probably won't talk about until draft season comes. And then people will be like, has anyone talked about this guy from Duke? And it'll be like, yeah, it's college football fans knew. And then they obviously upgraded at quarterback with Darian Mensah. They've got some underrated skill players. So people overlook them, including myself. Next is Wake Forest. Wake Forest, putting them in the bad tier would make sense if we're just doing power conference teams because they don't look super talented. But I do like some of the hires Jake Dickert made, and I could see Wake Forest like getting to a bowl game or having a decent year one. So we'll put them there. Keep in mind that we are putting the group of 5 teams in here as well. So there's a certain caliber of team you have to be in order to qualify for the bad tier. NC State is the next one. I think they'll be a good team this year. I think it's going to be a bounce back year for that staff and this team as a whole. They shook some stuff up. 2 new coordinators coming in the door. CJ Bailey's got the guy who recruited him and his quarterback's coach from last season as his OC. I think that's going to help him out a lot. We'll see if the defense can get back to doing what they were doing well last year. I don't know. I think Tony Gibson leaving might actually help the defense because the defense was kind of mid last year. I know Gibson did a lot of great things for them, but we'll see. Virginia is a team that most people would just automatically think belongs in this tier, but I actually like a lot of the moves they made. Their staff continuity is excellent. They've had the same staff since year one of Tony Elliott. He's headed into year 4 this year. They've got to make a bowl game. I think they've got the schedule to make a bowl game, and I think they've got a decently talented roster that can make a little bit of noise. Like 7-5 and even 8-4 if they really produce this year is not like completely out of the question for Virginia. Fun fact, Virginia and NC State play a non-conference conference matchup versus each other. So that's kind of a fun little tidbit there. Virginia Tech, another team to talk about here. The Hokies also changing a lot of stuff up, similar to what NC State did, where 2 new coordinators, a bunch of transfer portal guys, and I actually do like a lot of the moves they made. Virginia Tech is also going to go in this good tier, but they're closer to that great tier than I think pretty much everyone on this tier except for maybe Tennessee. I think that they belong in the conversation of like, they could pop this year. And so we just got to be ready for that. We could have been a year early for them. Pitt just has a slightly higher floor. So for now, I'd put them just the tier higher than Virginia Tech just because of what we know their defense is already. And then the continuity on offense. Now you've got Cade Bell, who's been great for them. And then Eli Holstein, the quarterback, returning this year. When he was healthy last year, I don't think Pitt really lost a game. That's the stat Pitt fans tell me at least. Louisville, I think is going to be really great this year. College football playoff contention, I don't know. I feel like it's a little bit of a stretch. There's a lot of new, and we've come to the point where we can trust the portal evaluations of Jeff Brom, but there's a lot of trust that has to be put in. It's not blind trust because we've seen the track record. It's good, but it is still a lot of trust. And so I like Miller Moss, but there's a lot of other aspects. They do have a great backfield, 2 fantastic running backs, and a defense that needs to figure out a little bit more this season, but still a good team and a great team according to the tier. We've got SMU as well. I think in a similar category to Louisville in terms of a team that, yeah, they did a lot more than Louisville last year, but I thought they were a similar caliber of team, and I think their defense takes a little bit of a step back this year. A lot of new, a lot of interesting pieces that are at play here. So I think the defense regresses a little bit, so I don't think they hit the same sky-high ceiling that they hit last year. They also have a slightly tougher schedule this season, although I'm not trying to let that affect too much. Cal's a team that's taken a lot of flack and a lot of heat because there was like a weird spring portal exodus and stuff. And there's concerns. I think the mid-tier is appropriate. I think Cal could make a bowl game this year, but that's only because of schedule and because their defense I still think is solid, but they could have some serious problems on the offensive side of the football this year that hold them back. Stanford is going to be one of the few power conference teams that qualifies for bad here. They have a lot of chronic issues, and then, you fire head coach pretty late into the offseason. You bring in Frank Reich, he's the interim. There's just so much weird, and they lost a bunch of talent in the portal. They just named Ben Goldbranson the starter. I love Ben Goldbranson. I cannot wait to see him in a Stanford uniform, going out there still throwing the ball. I thought he was done with college football, but I think that's not a great omen for Stanford. Goldbranson is not exactly like a guy that's going to put the team on his back. He's a game manager at best. He was a gunslinger for the Bees last year, really stepped in at some difficult times, helped to lead an upset victory over Washington State and a Pac-12 title. So shout out to him. He'll always have a special place in my heart. He was also great as a starter. He was like 7-1 at Oregon State, but more so had to do with the team around him at Stanford. Could look a little bit uglier. So now we're in the Big 12, it looks like. We got Kansas as the first team here. I'm going to put the Jayhawks in the good tier. They'll be a good team this year. They're trying to replicate a lot of what they found successful toward the end of last season, and that includes Jim Zebrowski as the OC. They've got another co-offensive coordinator in there whose name escapes me at this time, but they're doing really good stuff, and they should be more consistent on the offensive side of the football and be able to put together a bit of a more complete season, at the very least get back to a bowl game. Big 12 title upside, like a lot of the teams in this conference. Baylor, I'm really, really up on, really high on. I love their offense. Aranda is going to have to get this defense kicked into gear. I am going to put them in the category of playoff contention because of the amount they do have back on the offensive side of the football. I think they could be in that conversation absolutely and contending for that. And they've got a big game against Auburn in week 1 where I think they've got a chance to prove that right off the bat. Kansas State, ever so consistent. They've been in this exact tier for a little bit now. Compared to Baylor, Avery Johnson just has not shown the same amount of consistency that Sawyer Robertson was able to show last season, especially toward the end of last season with him really turning things on under Jake Spavital. So I still need to see that. Kleiman's had some tough coordinator losses that have sort of affected things, been some bumps in the road. They still have a very high floor. They could absolutely be in the CFP contingent tier when it's all said and done, but that's where I'm going to put them as a starting point. Texas Tech, though, is going to be in the CFP contention tier. Their offense showed a ton of great stuff last year as well. The defense was one of the worst in the Big 12, arguably the worst in the Big 12, which is pretty crazy. But they added so much talent. I think the talent will really infuse and help this unit out. I'm still concerned about their consistency. I think there could be a little bit of inconsistency from the defensive side of the football, but overall, I like them, and I think that they will be better. It's going to be hard to be worse than last year. Houston is a team that overall I do like as well. I think Wegman is going to give their offense a bit of a higher ceiling. I think they did a lot of underrated moves, and I think they were a bit of an underrated team last year. Look at those 3 conference games they won in the middle of the year. They were solid teams they beat. They beat TCU and Utah in there. So definitely a team that people are sleeping on, and I would just watch out for. I'm not going to go as far as to put them in like the great tier, but they could absolutely do some good stuff this year. BYU with Jake Retzloff, I really feel like belonged in the great tier, but I've seen it time and time again, specifically with literally the Utah Utes in the same conference, in the same state even. You can have a great team around you, but if your quarterback situation falters, you could have some serious issues. So that's why I'm going to put BYU in the good tier. I am not sold on any of their quarterbacks on the roster right now. They could be starting a true freshman. They could be starting, McKay Hillstead. There's a lot to not like about that situation and about what it could do to BYU's season. So that's where I'll put them tentatively for now. Cincinnati doesn't belong in the mid tier. They belong in the good tier this year. I just think they have got some really talented guys. I'm thinking of like a Dante Corleone and guys that can make a difference. Brendan Sorsby coming back at quarterback is really nice for them as well. And I think they'll be better than last year. I think they will really take another step forward. They're going to get to a bowl game, and I'm fairly confident that the rebuild is going in the right direction at Cincinnati. UCF, however, I'm going to put in the mid tier. Tempted to put them in the bad teams tier. There is so much new, though, that there's a scenario where UCF could pop, but Alex Grinch is their defensive coordinator and Scott Frost is their head coach. Just saying that again out loud makes me put them in bad teams. Mid, though, is where Oklahoma State will go. Gundy bringing in a ton of transfers. It's something he's never done. He's admitted to it. He's talked about it. There's some upside, but it's not what Gundy's known for. So if your belief that Oklahoma State's going to have a good season is blind faith in Gundy, it doesn't work because this isn't what Gundy typically does. So not feeling great about them. West Virginia will also go in the mid-tier. Rich Rodriguez just bringing in a ton. I think he has the most incoming portal recruits of any power conference team at like 52 or something like that. So a lot of new, some light continuity like Jaheim White at running back and Nico Martial could be the starter this year. So there's some, but it's really not a lot. It's going to be about what this new team looks like and functions like, which it could. I acknowledge that any of those teams that bring in a ton of portal players could pop in theory. TCU will go in the good tier. Fantastic offense. Questionable defense that the jury is still out on. That is the story for TCU this season. Arizona definitely has a little bit more upside without too big of a leap than West Virginia and Oklahoma State. Like there's like a not too crazy scenario where we get a 7-win Arizona team just because of a few things clicking and maybe Brent Brennan installing more of his stuff instead of trying to run what Arizona was running last year. And that works out for them. And so I do like that. I do like a few of the pieces that they added this offseason. I'm thinking of like a Chris Hudson at wide receiver, but overall should still be pretty mediocre and project to be pretty mediocre in the Big 12. Arizona State also in the contention tier, CFP contention tier, a team that absolutely will be in that playoff conversation and near the forefront of the Big 12 with all they return this year. This isn't a scenario where it's like Oklahoma State last year where they flopped, which I called, by the way, because Arizona State doesn't just return hollow production or a defense that was super opportunistic last year. They return a defense that was genuinely good, and they return an offense that was humming, and they have the same play callers there and the same staff. So I really trust a lot of that. We've got the Utah Utes. I'm going to put them in the great category. Key hinge point for them is going to be that offense under Jason Beck and with Devon Dampier. I might have been Dampier. I might be mispronouncing. I heard somebody pronounce it a different way the other day, and I've been calling him Devon Dampier this whole time. Maybe I'm completely wrong, but I butcher so many names that you're probably desensitized to it by now. Colorado is another team to talk about. Very interesting under Coach Prime this year. I'm still going to put them in the good tier just because of the impact he's had as a head coach. And there's been improvement through each of the first 2 seasons. Yes, they're without their 2 superstars, but still a team that I think and I trust can claw their way into a bowl game this year, despite maybe not looking as appealing on paper and despite having some flaws that could be terminal to any other team, basically. So That's Colorado. And then lastly, we got Iowa State. Iowa State, team that was in the Big 12 title game a year ago. They're not going to have that same group of really awesome receivers. Obviously, the two guys, Jay Higgins and Jalen Noel, that were there last year. And so when I'm talking about Iowa State, it's hovering between these two tiers. I'll put them here. Respect to Matt Campbell and what he's been able to do. Rocco Becht is back. Defense has got plenty of upside. Great tier, I think, is solid, but definitely behind Kansas State and Utah in that regard. I'm going to take a brief water break because we're doing this all in one take. All right. And we will resume. We've got the Big Ten is left, and then to the group of five, so you can see we're about close, not quite to the halfway point yet. Ohio State, absolutely in the top tier, even though they've got a new coordinator look and a new quarterback and so many new things. Still an elite talent roster and still so many blue chippers that are stepping in this year. You'd be dumb to say they're not in national title contention. Michigan is interesting. I know they'll have a really excellent defense. On offense, what are we going to get this year? We've got a new OC. We've got Bryce Underwood. Oh, I am going to put them in CFP contention because I do think they belong in that conversation. And of all the teams outside of the Big Three and the Big Ten, which the Big Three, by the way, are Oregon, Penn State, and Ohio State, let's just move them all up there now. Who are we kidding? All three of those teams are in national title contention this year because of what they have on their roster. Despite the concerns for Oregon, it's the O-line, it's some things on defense, it's young quarterback play. For Penn State, it's the fact that we haven't seen them win, and it's the fact that Jim Knowles is in his first year as the OC. I think Michigan, outside of those three, is the most serious team to consider when talking about CFP contention in the Big Ten, and that might be considered a hot take to some people, maybe not to other people. We'll talk about those other teams in just a second, like Michigan State, who belongs in the good tier. I think they'll scrap and claw their way to a bowl game. Jonathan Smith has always done just a little bit more with less, and I think in year two at Michigan State, that'll start to show a little bit more. I thought it was impressive. He clawed his way to 5-7 in his first year at Michigan State last season. Maryland, I'm not as optimistic about. I do like Michael Oxley. I acknowledge that he's been able to do some stuff under the radar and behind the scenes in the past at Maryland as well, and he did win 3 straight bowl games before this most recent tragic season, but they also only won 1 Big Ten game, and on paper, things look a little bit sketchy. And they do have a relatively manageable schedule, and maybe they could parlay that into a bowl game, but still, I'm just scarred by some of the things that happened last year. We got Rutgers. I think they also belong in the good tier. I'm not going to go too high on them, but I do love Cali McManus, and it takes a lot for me to not put them a tier higher. I still think on paper, Rutgers can do a lot this year. They play with a chip on their shoulder as well. They got a lot of things to like with their play style and with what they've been able to do. They've been able to drag some top-tier contenders, into the mud and make them play their style. I'm thinking of a few Rutgers games where they've been able to do that. But overall, I think they should be a solid bowl team. UCLA is interesting. I'm tempted to put them in good, but I think at the end of the day, I'm going to put them in the mid-tier. Yes, Nico gives them some upside at quarterback. The defense, I think, is a little better than people give them credit for, but still, Deshaun Foster is a head coach, not giving me a ton of reason to be super high on him. They did finish with a nice winning streak at the end of last year, or a couple wins on their way to like a slightly better-looking record, but I honestly just do not have a ton of faith in this UCLA team this season, and Nico was a project already as well, so not super high on them. USC, I am going to put in CFP contention. I just think DeAnton Lynn's defense could really, really come together this season, and I don't think Lincoln Riley will produce a mediocre offense in back-to-back years. So USC will be up there in CFP contention, in my opinion. Washington, another interesting team to talk about. I think they have what it takes to be considered a great team this year, and so that's what's going to qualify them for that tier, in my opinion. I think a lot of people are sleeping on the Huskies and what they have. I think they've got a star in Damon Williams at quarterback, and I just think they've got an underrated talent roster because of last season, and as a program, they're further along and better at reloading than people give them credit for. Illinois also belongs in the great tier. A lot of people would argue them to go up to here, but I'm going to leave them in the great tier just because I think people overestimate how good of a team they were last year. They had some sketchy games. They nearly lost to Purdue. They had a ton of one-score games they had to eke out there. And on top of that, they do return everybody, which is really nice, and you project they'll get better and develop, but they didn't do anything outstanding to continually build upon that this offseason. But you know who did? Indiana. Indiana was out there in the portal landing power conference starters like Fernando Mendoza and Roman Hemby, and they did that all over the place on top of a roster that went 11-1 last year with a really nice bedrock of guys to build off of, like Elijah Sarrata, wide receiver, And so I've got some confidence in Indiana. It's the same type of thing with Louisville where you trust the portal evaluations based off of precedent from the year prior. So that's what, to me, separates an Indiana from an Illinois. It felt like Illinois was a little bit more idle this offseason. Northwestern, I do like David Braun, and I do like some of the moves they made, like getting Preston Stone, but still on paper, not a very good-looking roster, and a team that I don't think has the upside to be able to spring a surprise season this year on us. Purdue is going to belong in the bad teams tier, the third power conference team to join us in that tier. They should be one of the worst power conference teams again. Barry Odom brings in so much new. They shouldn't be as bad as they were last year, which is good news for them, but still not a ton of faith in what they've got going on. Wisconsin, I would put in the good tier. I think they're comparable to a Michigan State and a Rutgers on paper, but their schedule is just so brutal. I don't know if it's going to matter. And also, there's the added layer that they just have been dysfunctional under Luke Fickell, so I just don't have a ton of faith in them. Minnesota, though, I think is going to go a tier above that into the great tier. I think they're closer to like an Illinois, and I think they might be better than Illinois this year. They literally beat them last season, and Fleck, I think, has gotten a really nice formula down. I wish we had more experience at the quarterback position this year. Maybe I'd feel a little bit better about them, but still feel pretty good about what Minnesota has on paper. Iowa, I'm going to put in the good tier. I know some people are really high on their offense this season and think Gronowski can just make it like explode, but those people are delusional, and mostly Iowa fans that are just, ignoring 23 years of precedent. Their offense is going to be just all right, possibly really bad. The defense should be really good, although the defense did take a step back last year, something to keep an eye on. Finally, I'll put Nebraska in the good tier. Another hot-button offseason team that some people might push closer to the great tier. They'll cite year 3 Matt Rule. Matt Rule has never had to do year 3 in a stacked Big Ten. He's also never had to do year 3 without his defensive coordinator, Tony White, who got poached by Florida State. So I know some people are confident in the new guy and think that some of the pieces they added can really help them, but they did take a hit in the defensive side of the football. I don't think that's going to be as far along as some people are projecting it to. And I also don't think that Dana Holgorsen just instantly makes things click on offense. So I've fallen for the Nebraska trap a couple times now. I think they're a solid team. I think they're a good team. I think they'll make a bowl game. Much beyond that, I'm not certain of this season. I'm not going to label them as a CFP dark horse again. It's just not happening. So we're left with all of the group of 5 teams, plus Oregon State, Washington State, and Notre Dame. We're going to put Notre Dame in the very top tier, national title contender. I think that's a very appropriate way to characterize the Fighting Irish this year. We're pretty much done with that national title contender tier. My goodness. No disrespect or not to do a spoiler for the group of 5, but we're pretty much looking at the CFP contention, great, good, mid, and bad teams now. Oregon State this year, I think, is going to be good. On paper, they look pretty solid. They added Malik Murphy. They did upgrade a lot of things. Last year, they were battered by the injury bug, and I think they've got an underrated staff. So I do think the Beavs will be solid. I think they'll bounce back at the very least, get to a bowl, probably win another Pac-12 title because Washington State going to be rebuilding a little bit, going to put them in the mid-tier. They still have a decent roster on paper. They add a lot of FCS guys from South Dakota State with Jimmy Rogers taking over, trying to reshape the Cougs program sort of in his image. And so there is some real upside there. Washington State could be a very intriguing team to watch, but definitely belonging in that mid-tier. And now we're dealing with a team like Memphis, which is a heavy hitter right off the back. You could talk about them as a CFP contender this year, and I don't know if I would stop you, but it does feel like it's almost like an in-between kind of transition year for Memphis. Brendan Lewis at quarterback, I think, is a pretty solid veteran quarterback presence, and I'm trying to figure out how I want to tier the group of 5, because I could put Memphis in great, meaning they're like just a tier below CFP contention, but with Memphis, I don't know if I would say with any sort of confidence they're better than a Tennessee or a Rutgers or an Iowa or an Arkansas. Even they play Arkansas this year. So I think I'm going to put them in the good tier. Things could get complicated and hairy real quick. This is typically why I separate the group of 5 in the power conferences. But I could weight it a little bit. So this is interesting because I feel like if I put them here, I'm measuring the group of 5 by a different standard than I'm measuring everybody else. But maybe people like that. Let's just take this and keep going. UAB is going to be a bad team under Trent Dilfer. I expect Dilfer will be fired at some point. They've got a decent offense. We'll see what they do this year, but really, I just don't have a ton of faith in this coaching staff for this team. Temple has Casey Keeler as their new head coach. I don't think he's going to make overhaul that's going to, completely flip things overnight. So I think it could be another struggle for Temple, but maybe they can go better than 3-9 this year. Navy is a team that is absolutely going to be a contender in the American Conference, which means that they would technically be contending for a CFP spot. But the executive decision I'm going to make now is I'm just going to say the great tier counts as like CFP contention. And then we're just actually going to shift Memphis. Well, Memphis maybe belongs in the same tier as Navy this year. Blake Horvath's back, ton of returning production. Navy did beat Memphis last season. So that's how we'll treat it. We won't necessarily put a group of 5 team in the CFP contenders tier, but then again, they technically are CFP contenders. So I'm changing my mind again. We're going to put Navy and Memphis up there. Army's another team to talk about. They don't have as much returning production. I think they'll run through some teams in the American like a buzzsaw like they did last year, but not going to have quite the same level of consistency. And they also dealt with something pretty rare for a service academy, which is outgoing transfers of really good players. It happened with Kanye Udo. They had a defensive lineman go to Georgia. Stuff like that happened a little bit, which is pretty surprising and not typical of what you would see from Army. South Florida, I think, is also going to be in this category of great team that could really contend there. But I don't know. Actually, compared to Memphis, why not? We're going to take a swing on South Florida this year. I know that they've been an off-season darling for a couple of years now. We'll see. And again, it's starting to make me uncomfortable seeing these teams above teams I wouldn't say they're better than. But just don't think about it too deeply. Don't compare them head to head. This isn't me saying Navy would, wipe Ole Miss this year, all right? FAU, I do think, is going to be a good team this year. I think they'll have solid offensive firepower. Zach Kitley taking over. Caden Veltkamp at quarterback. Tulane, I think, is going to be a CFP contender as well out of the American. So we got 4 of them in here. And you know what? We are going to bump Memphis down and continue to waffle on that team this year. East Carolina, I think, will also be good. I wouldn't quite put them in this top tier or this tier with Army and Memphis just because East Carolina is still working on a few things. They didn't have quite the consistency you would want to see last year. Yes, Blake Harrell took over at midseason. We've seen teams rally around interim head coaches, but also East Carolina doesn't return a ton of production from that team last year. Charlotte should be mid this year. They bring in Tim Albin as their new head coach. I think there's some upside. They could win some games. They were better than some people thought last season, I thought. So we'll put them there. Rice, new head coach Scott Abel, bringing in a very unique offense. Mid-tier, I think, is where they belong. UTSA, we'll put them up in the great tier next to Army and Memphis. I think they'll be closer to that tier with all of the returning production they have. Guys like David Amador and Devin McEwen and Owen McCown at quarterback. The offense will be prolific. We'll see what the defense looks like. North Texas is the opposite. No, it's the exact same, actually. Their offense should be fantastic. We'll see what the defense looks like. Shout out to Reese Poffenbarger, the former Albany quarterback, who's going to get a shot for them this year. They've got a lot of really good-looking offensive pieces. Defensively, they're trying an overhaul. They're trying to rebuild. If the defense can become even just slightly better, there's a lot of good things that they can do this year. We've got Tulsa to talk about. I don't think Tulsa will be very good. Not a ton to get excited about with Tulsa this season. They've got a new head coach as well, as do many of the American Conference teams, and I think they'll be near the bottom of the barrel with Temple and UAB, which gets us to the CUSA. Middle Tennessee, not a ton that's setting them apart this season. Derek Mason, fun fact, got rid of alternate uniforms this year so they could free up $1 million to use for NIL, which is pretty cool. And they did add some pieces. They added some pieces to the O-line, so maybe I'm being a bit harsh. Maybe mid is more appropriate. They do have a returning quarterback in Nicholas Vatiato. Definitely mispronounced that. But they do have some upside. The offense was horribly one-dimensional last year, though. Western Kentucky, we'll put them up in the great tier just because they'll be a top-tier CUSA contender. I could see them measuring up with some of these American teams. They have a ton of new this year as well, though. They basically went and raided, I can't remember what roster it was, Abilene Christian, I believe, getting guys like Maverick McIver, his offensive coordinator, other guys like that to just basically revamp this entire team. Sam Houston this year, I think they're going to regress a lot, losing a lot of what they lost, bringing in Phil Longo, sort of shifting schemes a little bit. They do have a little bit more continuity left over than a team like Jacksonville State that I would put in the same tier here. Both teams losing their head coach. Jacksonville State is doing a complete philosophy shift under Charles Kelly. So, I just don't know how that's going to work out for them this season. New Mexico State, I think, going to continue to have growing pains under Tony Vincent this year. or Tony Sanchez is his name, excuse me. And I think that'll continue. UTEP, I'm a little bit more optimistic on. I think they could be solid in year 2 under Walden. There were signs of positive progression there last season. Louisiana Tech, I think, could contend for a CUSA title this year. They do lose that defensive coordinator, Jeremiah Johnson, to Coastal Carolina, by the way, who assembled a really nice staff. But the offense still showed a lot, and they also lost like 5 one-score games last year. I think they can flip really quickly into an actual contender. Kennesaw State's another interesting team to talk about, but I think they're going to be bad year 1 under Jerry Mack. Kind of confusing to me that they fired Brian Bohannon, but they're doing some things outside of the box to try and set themselves apart as a CUSA program. Both the newcomers, Delaware and Missouri State, I think belong in more of the mid-tier. I think they could actually get close to 500. They're not competing for a bowl game this year because neither of them can make it due to FBS transition rules, but they've got some things to like, including both teams having certainty at quarterback and maybe staffs that are a little bit more locked in there. Liberty's going to belong up here with Western Kentucky in the great tier, both teams that are the top tier contenders for the CUSA title, as they are most years in the CUSA. And yeah, I like them. They return some all-conference players. Maybe CFP contention's the conversation you're having about Liberty, but I don't know if they have a good enough strength schedule to actually warrant that. FIU, I'm going to put next to Louisiana Tech. I think this is another kind of secondary contender that could be in this conversation about making the leap to the conference title game. So you'll have to understand, I'm not saying these teams are better than Kentucky. We're just tiering it relative to the group of 5, kind of. So please don't get mad at me. NIU, I'm going to put in the good tier. I think they'll be a solid team. They have very low returning production. I believe the lowest in the entire country. A lot of new faces, lost a bunch of guys in the portal, but Hammock has a very tried and true system. Looking for Telly Johnson to run wild for their offense this season. Ball State, I think, is going to be pretty mid. Micah Removich coming in as the new head coach. His OC came a year early. It's kind of a unique situation. Central Michigan in a similar boat. I think they'll be mediocre as well. Matt Drinkle is the head coach. He was the offensive line coach for Army last season, so kind of an outside-of-the-box hire, one that could work out in the long term. He didn't do a ton this offseason to instantly flip Central Michigan, but I think at the very least they'll be better along the line of scrimmage. I think maybe up a tier. Lance Taylor's Western Michigan team, we've seen the signs of progression over the last couple of seasons there, and they got to a bowl game last season, so I think they could potentially do that again this year. But I got to give a shout out to Chris Creighton, another head coach of the Directional Michigan School, Eastern Michigan. They had a bit of a down year, but I think this year they're going to bounce back. Statistically, they didn't profile too bad last year. They just had some bad bounces of balls, lost some close games. Bowling Green, year 1, Eddie George. I'm going to put them down in the mid-tier. There's a lot of new this year. They were building something really nice under Scott Loeffler. Maybe George can continue that, but I'm going to put them and keep my expectations tempered for now. Drew Pine could be the quarterback. That's kind of fun. Akron should be really bad. They're banned from making a bowl game this year due to being too dumb. Literally, their academic scores were too low. They will not be able to make a bowl game. And then Kent State, coming off a winless season. Coach gets fired for racking up too much gambling debt, and they bring in Mark Carney. No, not the Canadian Prime Minister. These two are a comedic duo. Pretty funny. Buffalo should be in MAC title contention, so we'll put them in the great tier. Ohio will also be in that conversation. Parker Navarro returns. The head coach, Tim Albin, leaves. He's the head coach at Charlotte now, but both coordinators stay home at Ohio. Really interesting stuff, and they might have an opportunity to do something interesting. Buffalo, year 2, Pete Lembo. I think they can build on that 9-win season. My favorite tradition of my camera overheating just occurred right as we're on the home stretch, of course. Miami of Ohio, another team to talk about. Chuck Martin has built a machine at Miami of Ohio, but their returning production a little bit lower this year. They might regress a little bit. Still could probably be in that conversation, though. In fact, maybe it's a little disrespectful to have them there. I'll put them back up there, especially because I've got Ohio there, despite the fact they lost their head coach. And then Toledo, ton of continuity. I'm actually going to respect Toledo even more, put them in the CFP contention tier. I could actually see them contending for a CFP spot, especially if they beat Kentucky in the non-conference on the road, kind of like they beat Mississippi State last year. We got Troy to talk about. Think it's going to be another rough year for Jared Parker's squad. Not overly talented. Shout out to Goose Crowder, though, their quarterback, all-time name right there. The Raging Cajuns, though, under Michael Desormeaux, will be really solid and in a position to contend. Southern Miss, Charles Huff bringing in all those new transfers this year. A team that's going to be one to be reckoned with in the Sun Belt this year. Braylon Braxton, the reigning Sun Belt Player of the Year at quarterback. So many new players. And then that leaves Marshall just completely shredded, and that's going to put them in the mid-tier. Lost so many pieces. Tony Gibson comes over and takes over as the head coach. He was the DC for NC State last year. I talked about it earlier. NC State's defense was kind of mid this last year. Gibson's never been a head coach. He's tried to bring in some talent, but again, not a ton that moves the needle. I believe Carlos Del Rio going to be the quarterback potentially. He was the backup at Syracuse last year. We got Texas State under G.J. Kinney. Some really great things have been happening. I'm going to put them in the great tier. I'm a believer in what they're building up in San Marcos, which I mispronounced for the longest time, but that one I got. South Alabama under Major Applewhite coming off a really good year. I will put them down in the good tier just because they did lose Gio Lopez and they did lose Fluff Bothwell and a few of those really talented guys at a time where you wouldn't want to see them lose them. And then also Rob Ezell, their offensive coordinator, got poached away. He's now the OC at Wake Forest, which I do really like. It's one of the reasons Wake Forest is in the mid and not bad tier. Arkansas State, Jalen Raynor and Jared Rucker could be one of the most exciting connections in the group of 5 this next year, but their defense does not play defense. They're pretty awful, and the offense does have some bust potential this year. So critical year for Butch Jones. His squad, I cannot believe, won 8 games last year. They profiled like a 4-win team and won 8 games. I think they're going to look more like a 4-win team than an 8-win team this season. Louisiana Monroe, I trust based off of what they were able to accomplish from last season. I think they'll actually get to a bowl game, and I actually really like what Brian Vincent has done, and I just think they're going to find ways to be effective, even though their passing game was essentially non-existent last year. They've just been a sneaky team, and sometimes I think a head coach is just capable of getting the most out of his squads, and that's the case with Brian Vincent. Give me James Madison in the CFP contention tier. They're my favorite to win the Sun Belt. I think they've got a chance to build a compelling case this year. I'm ready to get hurt by Old Dominion again. They've been a team that's hurt me several times from being high on them and then losing, basically. And we'll just see. It's a big year for Ricky Ronnie. I mean, he has to make a bowl game and finish above 500 this year. It really feels like that is an important aspect for them. They've got a lot of great pieces. Shout out to Jason Henderson, the former All-American linebacker who's back this year and healthy. Coastal Carolina made some great coordinator hires, and they've got some really high potential as a result of that. And this year, we'll see what happens. They've got a lot of new at Coastal Carolina, and so an opportunity maybe to build something new this year. Tim Beck, thus far, it has not clicked quite the way they were hoping. They've kind of regressed from their status as the top-tier Sun Belt team where they used to be. Speaking of which, so is App State. Year 1 of Dowell Logains this year. I think they'll be decent, but I don't know. You'd be hard-pressed to put them much higher than like above these 3 teams. Like, I don't know if I'd put them above much of the teams in the good tier. Georgia Southern, extremely underrated. They're closer to this tier with Louisiana and Texas State in terms of where they're at. They went 8-4 last year with losses to Boise State and Ole Miss. I mean, my goodness, they could have won 10 games if they just scheduled chalk in the non-conference. So, or cake in the non-conference, I should say. So that's where we'll put them. Shout out to Tyler Budge, third-string quarterback up there. Georgia State looks really talented on paper, but we're just going to have to see them actually win because they looked very talented on paper last year. Ted Hurst comes back a wide receiver. That was a big move for them to have him back. But again, on paper, they look great. In practice and in games, they did not look very great. They did beat Vanderbilt, which flashed some potential. So maybe that's something to read into. And that leaves us with the Mountain West. We've got some independents here. Let's just rifle through them. UMass had 2 wins last year. Both were over FCS teams. Joe Harissamiak comes in and brings in his Northeast roots to try and build something at UMass. But I don't think year 1 is where things are going to click. I think they'll win more games. Maybe an FBS game or 2 would be a good start. UConn in a really good spot. I'm going to put them up in like the great tier, kind of comparing them to some of these teams like Buffalo and Miami and Ohio and stuff. They won 9 games last year. They did not lose a single game to a group of 5 opponent, and they did end up winning over a power conference opponent against North Carolina in the Bowl. So a team to look out for there. And that leaves us with the Mountain West, where I'll start with San Jose State, a team I really like. I'm going to throw them up in the great tier because Ken Niumatalolo really brought a lot out of that team, and he's getting talented players to come play for him that want to play for him. That's very impressive. San Diego State, not quite in the same spot. Year 2 under Sean Lewis, what he did at Kent State looks more and more impressive every day with how lowly that program gets. And I'm still believing in him long term, but maybe a bit of another transition year for them. There's a few weird things going on, and they've just really struggled on both sides of the football, it seemed at times, especially on offense last year. We've got Fresno State, year 1 under Matt Entz. Entz coached 3 of the most recent, well, let's put them in the great tier. Fresno State is still a good group of 5 program. I don't think Entz is going to tear down everything they built in 1 year. But what I was going to say is at North Dakota State, which is where Matt Entz came from, he won 3 FCS national titles. So any Fresno State fans selling you on Entz will tell you that. And you go, wow. But then you realize at North Dakota State, they had literally won like 11 straight when he took over. And then he orchestrated 3 of the worst North Dakota State seasons since like 2011 when he was there, which included one where they lost in the quarterfinals, included 3 seasons where they didn't win conference titles, which they basically did every year before he was there. So I just don't know if I'm super sold on him as a head coach. I'll just say that. Air Force is going to be a team that gets better this year. They will not be missing a bowl game back-to-back seasons. Look for them to bounce back under Troy Calhoun. Maybe not a ton of upside outside of that, but I think they'll get back to a bowl. Colorado State under Norvell, again, a little bit of a transition year perhaps. I don't think they'll be quite like Mountain West contention status, but we'll put them next to Air Force. New Mexico is a team that is like one of my darlings. I'm going to put them up here in the good tier. Jason Eck bringing in basically an FCS all-star squad, and I like that a lot. I do like that a lot, so I'm going to have them up there. Maybe not. Maybe that's me being too aggressive. They can still be the team, I think, and be in this mid-tier, because I was just thinking Washington State's better than New Mexico this year. But then again, now I'm comparing, and that's unhealthy because this is kind of a mess. So we'll just keep going. Boise State, I'm going to put in the CFP contention tier. That should not be a hot take. They will contend for the CFP this year. Even though they lost Ashton Genty, they might legitimately be a better team in the aggregate with all they returned. They have so much great returning production and chemistry. And Maddox Madsen back at quarterback. Utah State, led by Bronco Mendenhall this year, will have a Swiss cheese defense. The offense does have some continuity in production, and we'll see what they can do with what they're bringing in. But Mendenhall just didn't bring enough of what made him successful in New Mexico for year one for me to be overly amped about what they can do in year one. Wyoming does have decent returning production this year, but it was such a ready-made, ready-to-win roster last year, and they fumbled it, that I don't trust them to succeed with this one either. Jay Sauvel headed into his second year as the head coach. For those of you not familiar with Wyoming's history, Craig Bohl was an awesome coach for them. He was leading them to 8 and 9 win seasons and really successful. He retired. He handed off the reins to Jay Sauvel and basically gave them a ready-made 8-win roster, and they just completely folded last year and won 3 games. So don't have a ton of faith in them. Hawaii, not quite in this same conversation. I think I'll put him here. I think Hawaii can get to a bowl game this year. Timmy Chang has been slowly trying to build things in the right direction. I think he's done it the right way. I think this could be a year where it bears fruit. Micah Alahado, that will be a name you all know. We'll put Nevada here. Jeff Choate, a solid coach. I think Nevada is going to have a lot of optimistic things and good things that happen this year again, but I think a bowl game could be stretching it. And then finally, UNLV is our final team that I will put in the CFP contention tier. I think they could win the Mountain West, and any team that wins the Mountain West will probably be in that conversation, especially if you have to go through Boise State, last year's representative from the group of 5. And so that does it. There it is. It is not perfect, especially with the intermixed group of 5 and power conference teams, but there it is, my complete tier list of all 136 FBS teams for the 2025 college football season. Let me know down in the comments what you think I got wrong, what you think I got right. And yeah, that was a lot of fun to do. If you watched this far into the video, you're a real OG. Thanks for doing that. Be sure to like, comment, subscribe. And also, I'll link the Discord down in the bio. If you haven't joined the CF Budge Discord already, it's the official community of CF Budge. You can go in there, chat with people. It's like a giant group chat if that's all you want out of it. But you can also upgrade, and there's some premium stuff that includes early access to these kinds of videos, which if you have that early access already, you might be watching this early before everyone else, in which case, congratulations. So I appreciate all the support you guys give. And I'm super excited to get this college football season started. So I will see you guys later this week.